Welcome to my channel. I hope you have all found it safely, because the destination is where it gets sinister. This is episode 1 of the Joe Sinister podcast, where we feature stories from Reddit's scariest subreddits and authors. This episode, we feature 4 stories for you tonight, from 2 authors on the No Sleep subreddit. Our first 2 episodes come from author C.M. Seabold, and I have put his part 1 and 2 together for our first story tonight. I motioned for Sam to follow me as we crept up to the large gate surrounding the allegedly abandoned mansion. Sam, who was visibly nervous about the situation, reluctantly joined me. There it is, Sam, the Thomas mansion. I looked up in awe at the building. Being an adventurous teen, I had always wanted to go ghost hunting. So of course, when I heard about the murder of the Thomas family, I knew I had to check the place out. Sam fumbled with his camera, trying to ensure it was set up properly. I sighed in frustration. I thought I told you to be prepared. I'm sorry, Dan, I was tired. I noted Sam's messy hair and half-opened eyes. This guy was always trying to sleep. At least he remembered the camera. I began to focus on my mission and started to move. Sam followed. And after a few minutes of investigating, we found a window which had been previously shattered. I crawled through the window first, and then looked back. Sam was still peering through the window, his expression filled with worry. Sam, come on. Sam was visibly trembling. Do you really want to do this? Sam mumbled, his voice trembling along with his words. Yes, we're already here, come on. Sam remained frozen in place. Irritation started to creep up within me. Just as I was about to scold Sam again, a loud crash echoed from the other side of the house, causing both of us to jump. Sam, come on! Sam shook his head in refusal. I sighed and snatched the camera from his hands before venturing into the hallway, searching for the source of the sound. Guess you have to do things yourself if you want to get them done at all, I muttered. I walked through the hall until I came upon a staircase where a dresser had apparently been thrown down. It had broken part of the railing and caused damage to the tile floor during its descent. It didn't take a high level of intuition to discern that this was the source of the loud crash. Taking a moment to compose myself, I began my trek up the stairway. I wasn't sure what lay at the top for me, but something deep within me tempted me to go up. The voice of curiosity that brought me here continued to lead me. Just as I reached the top of the stairs, I was startled by a loud creaking sound. It sounded like the pressure of stepping on a creaky floorboard, but I was sure it wasn't from my own step. Then I heard the opening of a door down the hallway. I turned my head to see who was there, but the darkness of the hallway shrouded any visibility. I reached for the camera to turn on the flashlight I had attached it to, and quickly pointed in that direction. The light revealed nothing but an empty hallway. Gathering up my courage, I began to walk towards the door that opened up. As I walked, I began to consider what hadn't crossed my mind until this very moment. What was I looking for? The Thomas had been killed by some maniac named Jack Henderson, and the psychopath had already been arrested. Whatever clues were in here are likely gone. That's when the obvious question hit me. Who was in this house? Maybe someone had come to snoop just as I had. But I found that unlikely. This was an active case, and the murder had only occurred a week ago. When I came here, the last thing I expected to find was someone else rummaging around and tossing furniture down the stairs. I stopped at the front door. It creaked open slightly, and something deep within my soul told me that entering this room would be the worst kind of mistake. The curiosity within me was waging war with my common sense. I could leave now, and no one would ever know. Or I could face the abyss within this room. I started to think about what the killer had said when questioned about the murders. Jack Henderson's only statement on the matter was, "His will be done." There had to be more to this. I had to figure it out. I had to find out. I gently opened the door, and the light of my camera illuminating what appeared to be the master bedroom, in which curtains and sheets were torn and strewn everywhere. Also was notable the stained blood of what I can only assume was the former Mr. and Mrs. Thomas. The feeling of dread had not entirely dissipated, but I tried to suppress it. My examination of the room found a lot of scattered, unimportant items, but then I noticed a piece of notebook paper on the nightstand. I reached out and grabbed the piece of paper, trying to discern the messy writing in the dark room. As my eyes adjusted, the message became clear. "Bad decision, Daniel." How did it... Wait, no, of course, it had to be a coincidence. This is my name. I never knew the Thomases, and I certainly had never been here before. The note must have been for someone else. I pocketed it just in case, and I looked up towards the window. Who was that tall man watching me from the wood line? My question would not be answered as someone grabbed me from behind, and I immediately kicked and cried out in fear. It was the police, of course. You don't go screwing around in a crime scene, start causing ruckus, and not get caught. I really was a stupid kid. Of course, they questioned me for a while, and eventually realized I was just an idiot with a camera. A camera which was taken as evidence, of course. I was relieved. It seemed like everything turned out alright. The next day, Sam's mother reported that her son had been missing since the night before. Samuel Ward was never found. So first of all, I should address a few things from the last entry before I get into recent events. The first part of this story took place in November of 2015. I was 14 years old at the time, and so was my friend Sam. We were a couple of stupid kids. Well, actually, it was mostly me with my stupid ideas. Wanting to be the host of a ghost hunting show, Sam's mistake was agreeing to be my cameraman. This does not excuse any of my actions, of course. Sam is probably dead now, and it's my fault. I brought him there, and I left him alone when he didn't even do what I wanted. And now he's gone. And there's not a single day I don't think about him, despite my selfish actions, which I've written here for many to see. I did care about him. He was my best friend. But despite all the unforgettable events of that day, I did try not to think about it. I really tried to burn those memories from my conscience. To live life with a clean slate. I had to be doing alright. Going to college, working, getting my own apartment. That was until last week, when I checked my mailbox. Grabbed the note and looked over it carefully, my eyes scanning back and forth to make sure I was seeing things clearly. "Have you forgotten, Daniel?" It was not quite the same handwriting as the note I had found in the mansion. However, it immediately reminded me of it. I thought back to that day, to that note, to that man standing in the wood line outside of the Thomas mansion. He had been impossibly tall. I had failed to get a good look. My blood ran cold as the memories of that day flooded back to my consciousness. I had wanted a ghost story, and got more than I bargained for. Bringing myself back to the present, I looked at the note in my hand. There had been no envelope, no address, just a note with 4 words scribbled on it. Whoever the sender was, they delivered it themselves. This was worrying to say the least, but I wasn't really sure there was anything I could do about it. But it had brought back bad memories, and I decided to get them out there. That is when I wrote part 1 of this story. Afterwards, I began to research. I figured I would start by looking into the Thomas family. Noah Thomas had married Samantha, and they had 3 children named Ryan, Emily, and their youngest Abe. Their family seemed to be the typical middle-class family, Mr. Thomas working for a large company holding a secure and valuable position in it. Things started to get strange when in 2013 the youngest son Abe, who had been 9 at the time, drowned in the family pool. But it only gets weirder from there. Less than a year later, Noah Thomas was now the CEO of the company he had worked at, which I will leave unnamed for obvious reasons. This essentially meant that they had a massive increase in income, and if I had to guess, a significant amount of political influence in the town. I'm not sure if I believe there's a correlation there or just circumstance, but rumors of greedy men sacrificing the innocent to obtain political power are not exactly uncommon. But if I had to guess, others certainly had their suspicions. One of those people who might have regarded Noah Thomas as a man worthy of judgment was Jack Henderson, or at least that's my current theory. The thing is, there isn't much on record about Jack that I can find. There are some records of him working with the same company as Mr. Thomas. It seems that this was discussed as a potential motive for the murder, and to be fair, it was the closest to a reasonable story. However, jealousy over a position in your company usually does not lead to immediate mental break followed by homicide. There has to be something more going on here. Jack Henderson was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He is currently still being treated in a mental institution that is not currently public knowledge. Jack Henderson entered a manic episode and broke into the Thomas mansion and killed 17-year-old Ryan Thomas before entering the master bedroom and stabbing Noah and Samantha Thomas to death. He then sat in the mess he had created before calling the police himself and reporting his handiwork. Emily Thomas, who was 14 at the time, had been staying at a friend's house for the night. That's about all the information I could find, and some of it is most certainly speculation. However, I have wanted to properly fill you guys in on what I'd found. Since you have read my story, I have no idea how my experience relates, and I've almost convinced myself I was imagining things. I know that's not true, but it's easier to believe that you're crazy. Man, my head hurts. I'm going to make sure I didn't forget any details and post this. Addendum. I was about to post this, but when I checked my mail today, I got another note. Same as last time. No envelope. All that was written on it was an address. I think it's near the community hiking trail. I'm not sure what I should do, or if it's even related. If you guys have any ideas, please feel free to let me know. Our second and third story come to us from author Nom 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 Nation. Please follow along as they describe for us why some houses don't let you leave, and why some towns you should try to leave as soon as you can. Sonder, a word used to describe the profound feeling of realizing every stranger around you has a life as complex and important as your own. It's also the name of the town I grew up in. Sonder lies on the eastern coast of the UK, on the north side of England. If you reach Scotland, you've gone too far, but if you're in Scarborough, you've gone not far enough. It sits somewhere between there, though I don't think anyone could be any more specific. You see, you can't find it on any map, printed or digital, new or old, color-coded or satellite imagery. There is no sign of this town existing at all. If you pay enough attention online, you'll find the odd few people mentioning the place, like this, that you're reading right now. Like a whisper passing by in a busy place, you can only know it's there if you're looking for it. Yet, to a vast majority of the world, Sonder is just a word. I was born there, and raised within its confines. I moved away at 15, about 10 years ago. It was a peaceful seaside village, the type where everyone knows each other, the type where when someone hosts a get-together, all residents are invited. It was a close-knit community. I still remember it with mostly fond memories. The waves lapping onto the sand through the night, the cobble streets scorching your bare feet as you walk back from the beach on a summer's day, the dark woods that overlooked the town from High Hill. High Hill is what we called the hill that stood next to Sonder. It blocked any chance of a view of other towns or cities. We resided in a valley at the edge of the sea, and whilst we liked it there, it felt very secluded. The town had a few small businesses. My favorite was Uncle Pete's Pizza. Everyone called him Uncle Pete, although he wasn't actually anybody's uncle. But his pizza place was perfectly between our home and Mum's pub. Every Friday she would pick up a pizza on the way home. Absolutely no exceptions. Me and my older brother Jacob, we were always excited for this. Much of the town had been there for generations, the population naturally getting smaller as more and more of it became family. But a few people would move there every now and then. All of them found the town in the same way. A leaflet coming through the letterbox while searching for somewhere to move to. Every single time, the same story, they were driven here by a house moving service. I guess with no directions or a map, it would be difficult to make your own way here. They were lovely. They really helped us, they would always say. Nobody ever really seemed to question it much. I mean, it's not like we're trapped. We could leave whenever we wanted, make no mistake. Sonder was no prison. It didn't even feel like one. It's just difficult to find, and leaving just felt icky, like you shouldn't do it. As the internet became mainstream, it became more and more obvious to people that the town was so hard to find. Suddenly people had friends from outside of Sonder, but they could never visit, because they could never seem to find a way in. GPS signal was weak, and opening any app on your phone that tracked your location wouldn't pinpoint you. One truly odd thing about Sonder was the appliances. All of them had the same logo on somewhere, the letter V in a circle. Since leaving, I've tried to research this company, but to no avail. The moving company that people arrived in also had this logo on their vans. The town had its issues, none more known than the scream singers. At night, if you listened hard enough, you could hear them. A chilling, soft sound. It was almost like a distant scream, yet more melodic. Something enchanting, yet fills you with dread. Nobody ever saw them, but someone in the town would go missing every now and then, and maybe once, twice a year. Someone lived alone and hadn't been seen in a few days before anyone realized. Some were cuddled up to their partner in bed, only for their partner to wake up with them no longer in their arms. The only thing that they had in common is that there was never any sign of entry or struggle. My entire life, I've known the echoes over the valley to mean trouble, but my mother used to tell me stories of when the townsfolk thought they meant hope, a simpler time. It's difficult to pinpoint exactly when people made the connection between the disappearances and the whistles of the night, but they'd always start a few weeks before a disappearance and stop the night after someone had gone missing. This had always intrigued me, but not as much as it did my brother. Jacob found it fascinating, perhaps because he never had someone close to him taken and didn't understand the pain. To him, it was just a mystery, wrapped in questions. Some believe the scream singers to be the one taking these people. Some believe their calls to be a warning that something dark is coming. Whatever people believed their intentions to be, everyone knew that their somber singing over Sonder was only bad news. My fond memories of the town became clouded when the trauma of my final few days there entered my mind again. Years of therapy helped me cope, but I feel like talking about it publicly might be the final thing that may bring me peace. As far as I know, I'm the only person to have seen a scream singer, or at least the only living person. It was the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, the 21st of June. Sonder had always held a small festival on this day. It dated back to almost a century at the time, being the 97th consecutive solar celebration. The festival took place not during those long sunlight hours, but as the sun began to set and the longest day ceased, at about 9:30 p.m. The town of Sonder felt more melancholy than usual, especially for the festivities that were going on. The scream singers had started their wails again about 3 weeks prior, getting louder and louder each passing night. Sure enough, about an hour after the festival began, you could faintly hear the noises again, piercing through the sweeter melodies of the festival and the chatter of the crowds. People tried to ignore it and continue the celebrations, but every time the wind blew in just a particular way to make the noises more prominent, you could see the look on everyone's faces, the unspoken silent fear, washing through the crowds like a wave. My mom's pub, really, our family pub, was right at the festival. The doors were wide open and people kept coming in and out. It was always one of the busiest nights of the year. Me and Jacob were sat drinking red wine. He was 17, had a proper glass, but I still had half lemonade in mine. It was the only night of the year I was allowed to drink alcohol. The festival was still going strong, when Jacob had an idea to go a little out of town and get a better listen to the scream singers. I was hesitant, but I was always up for an adventure, so half reluctantly I agreed. We got a few streets away before howling became louder than the music. We stood in the perfect mix of the unknown to one side and enjoyment to the other. We should not have kept going, but we did. We reached the final building before the cobbled streets turned to grass and mud. Without saying a word to each other, it was like we knew what we wanted to do. We wanted to be the first persons to have seen the scream singers, the first to understand them. We didn't know that only one of us would catch a glimpse. High Hill was steep, but not too steep. You didn't need your hands to climb it. It just took a lot of energy. Every now and then we looked back at Sonder. You would almost think it was a ghost town from how dark it looked, if not for the bright festival in the center. The only clue of any life all packed together, the sounds of cheering and singing and music, echoed up the hill. All the while, the sounds of the ghostly wells echoed down, a battle between good and evil, not seen but only heard. As we reached the dark woods, we looked at each other. It felt like we hadn't spoken in ages, so I broke that. "We're really doing this." Jacob nodded. I knew he would. I just needed to say something. Hearing nothing but ghastly screeches was driving me insane. We wandered around there for what seemed like forever, though it was closer to maybe 5 minutes. Every slight crunch made me flinch and turn around. There was never anything there, but the haunting screams which were all around us. We reached a clearing, and the sounds of the scream singers seemed louder than ever. In the center of the clearing was a rock, about as tall as me and a little wider. Jacob held me, as he could clearly tell I was scared. "It's alright, it's just sounds. There's nothing to be afraid of. Maybe we should head back." They only told me one thing. He couldn't see what I could see. Stood on the rock is something I will never get out of my mind. A tall gray figure, about twice as tall as any human I'd ever seen. It had 2 arms, but only 1 hand. The hand it had looked what I can only describe as twisted. The fingers weaved together in a way that didn't make sense, and certainly wasn't natural. The shape of it was overall humanoid, but the proportions were all wrong. It had no eyes, at least not at first. I was terrified looking at this thing, but the moment my heart truly dropped was when its eyes appeared. They slowly came out of its skin. There was no evidence that this creature should even have eyes. There were no holes for them, but its face opened in a mesmerizingly disturbing way. I saw 2 eyes slowly come forward. The face closed again, with the eyes looking right at us. There were only 2 eyes. I counted them. 1, 2. The face opened up again, as it let out a horrific scream. I ran. I ran faster than I ever have in my life, only occasionally looking behind me to make sure Jacob was running with me. He was, but he wasn't running from the scream singers. He was only running to catch up with me. He had no idea why I was so scared in that moment. We ran all the way down High Hill, nearly tripping over. Running down a steep hill is difficult at best of times. As we got back onto the cobble streets, I turned around and looked up at the woods. Not a sign of anything chasing us, but the screams were still so loud, even down here. By this point, Jacob had caught up and was right beside me. He kept asking why I was running, but I was too shocked to answer him. We ran another street and he reached out to hold me. I stopped running and let him hug me. He told me that whatever I saw was going to be okay, and that we were safe. I closed my eyes with tears streaming down my face. I opened my mouth and began to explain what I saw, getting words out between choking on my tears. It was this gray thing, on the rock. You could see the rock, right? Well, on top. I realized the howling stopped. I opened my eyes. Jacob wasn't there. I was standing in the middle of the street with my arms out, hugging nobody. I looked to my right and could see the festival. I felt empty and confused. I walked through the crowd, tears still streaming down my face. I found my mother at the bar and she asked me where I had been and if I knew where Jacob was. I told her everything and she closed up for the night. We both knew that the scream singers had claimed their next victim. She wasn't angry at me for going to the woods. She held me tight and neither of us spoke a word. We just wept and wept until we were too tired and too empty to weep anymore. The next day was Friday. I got out of bed in the morning after absolutely no sleep. My mom was downstairs packing boxes. She told me we were leaving the same day. Within an hour we were in the car, driving away from home. We passed Uncle Pete's Pizza. I realized this is the first Friday in my life that we weren't eating from there. As we drove further away from the sea, and I saw outside the small town for the first time, I already knew that leaving our life behind would not fix anything. Sonder is still out there. I hope somebody can find it. My house has a room with no doors. Every room has an entrance. It doesn't have to be grand, it doesn't have to be consistently accessible. Simply by its very definition, a room cannot be a room without a way in or out. Yet every rule has an exception. I've seen the exception to this one, deep within my house. So deep, in fact, that I have absolutely no idea where exactly this room is. But I know it's nearby. I've heard people inside, and I've even been inside myself. Between me and my sister, my parents have 2 daughters. I was the last one to get my own place, despite being the eldest by a year. My encounter with the room occurred only a few days after moving in. I wasn't doing anything particular. I was just walking down the stairs. A perfectly mundane activity that we don't even think about. A means from point A to B. But what happens when point C gets in between? When we stop paying attention to where we're going? Where do we end up? Each step creaked gently below my feet, something that doesn't bother me, but it seemed particularly louder than usual on this occasion. Perhaps it took more of my attention than I'd realized, because on the final step, I tripped. Not enough to hit the floor, but enough to stumble and lose my balance. As I caught myself from my momentary fall, the house saw my temporary lack of concentration. The room changed. Walls of an off-white color surrounded me, with most of the paint cracking and flaking away with age. The floorboards were visible and rough. Even through my socks I could feel the points of wood painfully pressing my skin. The air felt thick to breathe. A musty, dusty smell filled my lungs. The room was bright, although missing any specific light source. It simply seemed to emanate from a thick, twisted wood pillar in the center of the room. In one corner, an old mattress had claimed enough dust to be unsleepable. Even if clean, it didn't appear very comfortable. Needless to say, I was more than confused. My mind instinctively wanted to retrace my steps, despite the fact that I couldn't have possibly gotten lost. This was my home, with one staircase. I turned around to go back. It took this long for me to catch on to the fact that the stairs were no longer there. In their place, nothing, less than nothing even. There was no evidence of any way in or out at all. No windows, no stairs, certainly no doors. My claustrophobia began to set in. My mind had stopped searching for an explanation and was now only set on finding a way out, an impossible feat, caused by an equally improbable room. I felt my heart rate raise, and I dropped to the floor. Time felt like it was moving slowly. Every corner of my thoughts focused only on the walls around me. They may not have been closing in, but my fears were. As my knees hit the floor, they felt soft. They had landed on gentle, almost woolly material. As my vision focused and my racing mind calmed down, I realized I was in my hallway. Sunlight beamed in through the window, reminding me that I was free to leave at any time. I immediately went on a walk. I needed to feel the outside air. I didn't tell anybody about this at the time. In all honesty, I let it slowly sink into the back of my mind. After a few days, I no longer thought of it. I hadn't forgotten. How could I have forgotten something like that? I simply pushed it away. That was until my sister found the room. Just 5 days after my encounter, she dropped by to visit and see the house for the first time. I told her I'd give her a tour. The house seemed to take that liberty for me, though. I specifically remember being in my bedroom, upstairs, cleaning some things away. She had always had a cleaner room as a kid, and part of me just wanted her to notice that I was more mature now that I lived alone. I wasn't being loud. I would have heard the door if someone had knocked. I'm sure of it, but I never heard a knock. I heard her scream. It didn't echo through the house. It seemed to crawl up through the walls as a muffled noise. All around. "Help!" I heard her cry. "Where are you?" She sounded terrified. "Where are you?" I yelled back, repeating her question. I realized now that this wasn't helpful and I never even answered her. But in the panic of the moment, I just wanted to find her. Somehow, even on the ground floor, her voice seemed just as distant as it had upstairs. I opened the front door and stepped into the garden. Only then did the sound seem to change. It was clearly coming from within the house. I turned back around, yet as I entered the hallway, I bumped into my sister. We grabbed each other. Where the fuck was I? The question alone caused my mind to think back to my experience. I pulled away from her hug, now feeling equally as shaky. A room with no doors? Her silence spoke for her. She had seen it too. She began to explain. "You weren't answering the door, so I let myself in. And I thought the place looked strange, but I thought nothing of it. Another example of being unaware of your surroundings. As I closed the door behind me, it just disappeared. I ran around and then suddenly I bumped into you. And the room was gone." We sat down and I told her about my experience. We told our parents. I feel more confident in telling people now that I wasn't alone on the matter. But obviously they just saw it as some weird ghost story. "Spooky," seriously, was the first thing our dad said. The traumatic events were, simply by the nature of their absurdity, nothing more than a tale. His tune changed when he came to visit a few days later. It didn't happen immediately, but it didn't take long. He had been sitting on the sofa with Mum for about half an hour. "Where's the toilet?" "Upstairs. First door you see. It'll be open." I felt slightly guilty. Deep down, I think I knew he would find the room. When he came back with a pale expression, I had my answer. My mom looked rightfully concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Are you okay, dear?" She spoke gently as she stood up and walked over to him. "He's seen the room," I explained for him. Mum's puzzled face showed me that she wasn't exactly sure what I meant, so Dad finished the explanation. "The one with no doors." Mum, of course, experienced it too by the end of their visit. On their way out of the front door, Dad was holding her hand one moment, yet the next she was gone. Like the rest of the cases, she returned a few moments later. albeit shaken up. Everyone who visits gets to see the room. There are no exceptions. Every single person who has ever visited my house has seen the room at some point before leaving. Then they safely and promptly returned. What's stranger still is that it never occurred more than once. A single visit is all anyone has ever seemed to be permitted. Family members, friends, mechanics, delivery drivers that step up just one step too far. If you step foot through the door, you'll be seeing the room. This has been true for 3 years, as long as I've lived here. It became almost charming. Last night I met a guy whilst out with some friends. He was nice, almost had a familiar sense to him. After chatting for a while, I told him about the room. Oh yeah, very funny. His skepticism was showing. I'm serious, ask any of my friends here, they've all seen it. He didn't ask any of them. Perhaps he thought they'd just sound as insane as I did. You're just trying to get me back to your place. I smiled at this thought and played into it. Well, why don't you find out? He seemed to pause when he saw the house, looking pale already. I had never had someone look so frightened of the room before even seeing it. I told him that there was nothing to be afraid of, and after a moment he apologized whilst following me inside. Once inside, his composure became calmer. He immediately told me he was going to use the bathroom. Without even asking where it was, he simply assumed it was upstairs and headed for it. Odd, I thought, but my mind was more focused on the upcoming witnessing of the room. I was excited to prove his doubts wrong. Strangely enough, he came back without ever having seen it. It takes some time for some people. Let me show you around. The more you move around, the faster it'll happen. I gave him a tour of the house. When he reached the final door upstairs, my bedroom, he smiled at me. Maybe it'll happen if we go in there. I smiled back, knowing his confidence would be humbled once he saw the doorless room. As I turned my back to him and opened the bedroom door, I felt his presence vanish. Turning around, confirming my suspicion, he was gone. Oh my God! The sound of his voice crawling up from the walls. Where am I? I told you. Believe me now? Well, yeah. How long does it last? A minute, at most, I spoke whilst laughing. Yet, every rule has an exception. A few minutes in, I started to get worried. After an hour, he begged me to help him up. It's now been a whole night, and his voice has stopped. The room has always returned people. Always. Why was this man an exception? I wanted to have helped him, but I'm not sure even where I would have started. Calling the police seemed out of the question. How would I even explain to them that the house had kidnapped somebody? I spoke to him all night, trying to help him find a way out, but we both knew he wasn't getting out until the house allowed it. Towards the end, he gave up. He started talking about how regretful he was. At the time, I thought he meant for visiting the house, but thinking back, I believe he meant something else. He kept talking about doing the wrong thing at the wrong time. The final words I heard him say before I stopped understanding him entirely was the most telling. She's gonna keep me here. Is he talking about me? Or does he know something I don't? Researching my address further yielded an interesting development. He had been the previous owner of this house. Perhaps subconsciously I recognized him, intrigued by his familiarity. I never met the previous owner before buying the house. But it can't be a coincidence. I must have seen him somewhere before. I also found an old listing of the house from a few years before I moved in. The original floor plan had a basement, something this house clearly lacks. Could this be the room? A friend of his came by today and asked if he was still here. I explained he had left in the night. His friend came inside, and he never saw the room. The room with no doors had found its prisoner. It no longer takes visitors captive. If you enjoyed those stories, please consider leaving a like and subscribing, as I'll be uploading every week on Fridays from now on. Please leave your thoughts in the comments, and follow us on other social media platforms. If you have any stories that you would like to be read by us, please email us at vo.joegabaldon@gmail.com. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the spooky season.